everyone and welcome back. So in this video we are going to talk about suspense and loading, right? Suspense and fallback. So this API was already available for dynamic loading of the component, but in this example what we are going to talk about is, let's say you are loading a very heavy API which takes time. In that case, while loading the API, you can wrap the whole component which is doing the fetch inside a suspense. So you should be able to show some kind of a loading or a spinner, right? This is done in two different ways. We can also use a traditional way where we can just make a Nextjs call when the data arrives. Then we can just simply set the data in the hook and render it. And if the data is not there, we can just set the loading state. And if the error is there, then we set the error to the error. So we can show appropriate messages on the component side. So this is the traditional way of doing it, right? Is loading, set loading, post. In the use effect, we can make API call, is loading true. We got the fetch. If you got any error, then you can set the error. But when the state is loading, you can show the spinner, no data. When the is loading is false and you got the data, then render the data. Here you can have one more state like error state. If there is any error, like inside this dot catch, you can have one more state. In this catch callback, you can set the error true. That is also possible. And when you have an error, if there is error, then do this. This kind of rendering you can do. We can have something like error and set error. What this is doing, this is actually traditional way of doing things. Error is initially null. Here you will do the set error. And I will set this error object which is coming from this catch block. And here if error is there, I will return something else. Maybe a spinner with some error style or something, right? So this is the traditional way of doing it. Now the same thing, how we can do using suspense and fallback. Now, if you want to do it in the React way, in the React 18, we got this suspense and a fallback. So whatever the component which is loading this heavy API call, right? Here this component is actually loading the lots of universities data. So that we can wrap inside a suspense, and the fallback is a spinner. We can show some spinner component or some loading component which has a loading image and what this component contains. We will see what component is doing. This component is actually trying to make some API call resource data.read. And I will talk about what this thing is. Resources fetch data. So this is like a very special code. I'm doing nothing much here. Fetch data, right? Inside this, I'm just creating a wrap promise. And this is just a Nextjs call because this call can be resolved, can be pending, and can be rejected. Wrap promise, and this is the promise. So here we are checking the state. If promise.then means if promise is resolved, either it can be succeeded or either it can be error. And here we are exposing a method based on status. If status is pending, if you see this code, status initially is pending, and throw suspend. If status is succeed, that means we got the data through result. If status is error, then through result. If status is success, then return result. So remember these two important things. Here we are throwing suspend. So this is actually a special case where React will understand, okay, the data is still being called. I mean, data loading is happening. So we need to show the suspended state. I mean, we need to just use the fallback mechanism. Here, suspend callback component. And here we are actually calling this read function, resource.data.read function. And this read function will give us the status. If it is pending, then you will get a throw suspend. Then the status will change. Either it will return result. So you can see here, read. And read function is going to return the things based on the status, and status will be based on the promise. So this is what happening. You got the data. If you got the data, then you will pass it. But here the data fetching is not happening right away. Initially it will throw suspend. That means data is still being processed, and you can just show the fallback, which is a spinner. So if you want to understand it with another example, this is the same. So here inside a post component, this post component I'm trying to render. So this is the traditional approach, right? And we are going to use suspense and loading. This is the post component which is using post data. Okay, post data is actually a function call let fetching equal to fetch, and here we are tracking the status. This is what I'm returning. Status can be pending, rejected, and fulfilled. If the status is fetching, we are throwing throw suspend or throw fetching. That means this is the way to tell data that data is still being fetched, and this is where we are decoding the whole thing. This is what we are tracking. And here inside a suspense and fallback, we are loading all the posts. So this post which is making this asynchronous call is wrapped around react.suspense, and the fallback is this spinner. So this is important, what we are doing inside this post where we are fetching the data. So let's see this in action. It is showing all this. Let me reload this thing. Data is already loaded, so it will take some less time. So here I will load this. It took some time, right? And then it is loading and it is showing the data. I mean, there was some spinner that is not being shown, but you can see there are 2000 results are being shown. So let me restart this application and show you again. So here I reload this thing, and you can see this loading appeared, and then the actual data appeared. So this is how this fallback, suspense, and fallback really works with the React 18, and you can wrap inside asynchronous call that is happening inside a child component.